She swore to me up and down that that thing would come out of the hills, walked up out of the ditch, and crossed the road in front of him about 15 feet away and just turned and looked at him. My name is Matt Sieber from East Tennessee, Bigfoot.org. I started the organization in 2005. Got interested in Bigfoot when I was just a kid back in the 70s, watching the mysterious monsters. Always had an interest, fascinating, scary, that kind of thing. But in 2005, my then 15-year-old son had an encounter in our backyard in Roane County, Tennessee. And it just rolled from there. I tried to talk to a lot of people online. Of course, even back then, there was a pretty good internet presence of Bigfoot information and Bigfoot groups. But everybody I talked to seemed to treat us like a bunch of dumb rednecks or hillbillies. And I thought, I can do this myself. And I started just talking to people and started asking questions, and people started talking to me and answering questions. And before you knew it, I had an organization, and that's what I do today. East Tennessee only. It's a big country, and there's a lot of nationwide organizations out there, but I mess with East Tennessee only.
And so what does this organization primarily do?
We take reports. We do occasional investigations. We get together and talk about things and just try to get an idea of who or what these things actually are. Of course, nobody really knows. If they know, they're not telling us, or at least they're not proving it to us.
Right.
We're just we're enthusiastic. We're involved. We try to talk to as many people as we can. Just try to, about like everybody else, we're just trying to figure out who or what they are.
Well, tell me about this encounter that your son had back in 2005.
Okay. If you're familiar with teenagers, even back then, and of course even before the internet or anything, when summertime's around, they usually are up all night and they sleep all day. At least that was the case with my son. And I had a chore I needed him to do. I had a truckload of sand that I needed to have unloaded, and I insisted that he do it, but I didn't care when. So he found himself at 2 a.m. in our backyard shoveling sand out of our truck under a security light. And that's when it walked up on him, and it was standing behind a bird feeder that was 6 foot high. And he said it was about a head taller than the bird feeder. So I was pushing at least high sixes, maybe 7 feet. And he saw it and initially thought it may have been one of his friends. I don't know how your mind works when you have this kind of encounter, but he got out of the truck with his shovel and started walking over toward the feeder. And it was probably 10, 15 feet away, maybe 20 feet. And when he started walking toward it, it turned and walked away, a fast walk. He called it a lope. He said it had a funny walk to it, and it was walking fast away from him. And when it walked directly under the security light, he could see that it was not a person, but it was covered in long black hair, and he could see the muscle tone. He could see the charcoal-ish skin under the hair. It was glistening. He said it was well maintained, well kept. He said it was pretty, in a sense, like it had been bathed, it had been washed, it was keeping itself up really nice. It wasn't matted or dirty looking at all. And for whatever reason, I can't even imagine, he continued to follow it until it got down to the road. You would have to understand our property. He was in the backyard, and it walked around a dog lot and back down the hill to the road. And he followed it to the road, and it walked across the road and over into another driveway and back up on the ridge and disappeared. That's pretty much the story. He told me just recently that he could see its eyes, and I don't know if it was something, maybe a a reflection from the lights that were on in our kitchen in our back of the house, or if there was something else going on there. But he never got a good detail of the face. But he did notice that it was very muscular and very well kept, very athletic looking. So
That was his
that's his
only
story.
encounter.
Yes, that was the encounter, and of course that's the encounter where I tried to contact some of the more reputable groups, and that's when we started feeling like we weren't being taken seriously. And it has messed with him. It's messed with his life somewhat.
Mm.
So, and of course, I'm stuck looking for Bigfoot now. So, but again, my son's not the only person in my family to have had an encounter. My sister and her entire family had an encounter. My ex sister in law had an encounter, and even my mother saw one on the side of the road one night. My sister and her husband, who's now deceased, and her family, they were driving near the Oak Ridge Reservation in Tennessee, where a lot of scientific and secretive things go on. And this was many years ago, probably, I want to say 2003, 2004, maybe, and maybe even earlier. I'm not really sure. I'd have to talk to her again about that. But they were just driving home from a visit to my dad, who lived in Middle Tennessee. And they came around this curve, and there was this 4 foot tall, maybe 5 foot tall thing standing on the side of the road, waiting for them to go by so it could cross. And she said it was the ugliest thing she ever saw. She said it's really skinny and dirty and matted. And he said its arms hung down to its knees, and it had a bent knee posture, and its head was leaning over. And she said it was just a terrible looking thing, but it was small. It wasn't what folks would typically consider a Bigfoot per se. It looked like what would be considered a Bigfoot. It just wasn't very large, probably a juvenile or even a child. Not even sure about that. But then again, the conspiracy theories abound when it comes to places like the Oak Ridge Reservation. Who knows what they got going on over there? The same year my son had his encounter, that winter, that December, my then sister-in-law, she worked night shift, and she was driving home, and she saw one cross the road as she was heading home on the same ridge line that we lived on, but probably 5 miles away. And it crossed the road in front of her and just up onto the hill. And she said, like 3 steps, it moved about 15, 20 feet up into the tree line, where it then peeked out from behind the tree and watched her go by. My mother's encounter was probably 2014, 2015. She was going to church on a Wednesday night in the same vicinity that my ex sister in law saw hers. And she was driving by the convenience center, the dump, where everybody takes their garbage. And she saw a large brown cedar tree on the side of the road. That's what she saw. That's what she described, the cedar tree. And she'd never noticed it before, but there it was. And when she came back from church, about an hour or so later, that cedar tree was gone. So I went back there the very next day. She told me about that, and I found a 17-inch track. And of course, no tree had been cut down. There was no sawdust. There was no tree, but there was a 17-inch track on the side of the road in the mud. So
Well,
those
it
are the
sounds like they're
stories.
just abundant down there.
Well, I would believe more often than not that there's maybe two or three around that area at that time anyway, because my son's encounter, it was black. My sister-in-law's encounter was a brownish black. And then of course, my mother's sighting all those years later was brownish. So, and I'm not even sure if they keep the same color every year. They may change color depending on the seasons, not much like an animal would with and even we as people, when we get out in the summertime, our hair tends to lighten up somewhat. But I don't know how many there are here, but I know there's more than one for sure.
So let's kind of go back to what you touched on about not knowing
Mhm.
what they are. What are your, speculatively speaking, in the research you've done and the visuals that your family has seen, what do you think they are?
Well, from the visuals and everything that my family's explained to me, they're just an unknown primate. I mean, that's as far as we can go. But in all my research and all my investigating and reading and listening and talking to people, there's something more going on. I have to believe that there's something. Uh, I hate to use the word paranormal, but when I say paranormal, I just simply mean out of the realm of what we understand. I don't mean ghosts and all this kind of stuff. Paranormal, as in just unknown. They have abilities that maybe we can't even begin to fathom. I don't believe it's a simple case of an unidentified animal. It can't be. There's a level of intelligence that these things have, and I'm not saying that based on the reports and the encounters my family's had. I'm basing that on all the years since 2005 that I've studied and delved into this subject, and all the people I've talked to, and all the things that they've told me. And I tend to believe most people most of the time. So I know there's truth in everything somebody's telling me. I can usually tell a liar. They may embellish somewhat, but for the most part, I believe that there's a level of intelligence there that we can't begin to understand. Are they human? Some people believe they are. Some believe that they're an ancient race of humans that have been here longer than we have. Some believe there's an alien connection. Some believe there's a dimensional or even a demonic connection. Um, I've not made my mind up. I don't know. I'm definitely not an expert on the subject. I just know a lot about these things, of what they say they are and what people believe they are. Again, I'm one of those folks. There are no experts in this field because, science hasn't even um, accepted the fact that they're real. But I know they're real. I just don't know what they are. Doesn't
What
have
do
a
you
clue.
think? What do you think will bring them forward to the public, where people will understand that these are actually in existence up?
Well, just this past week there was this thing going on in Washington about UAPs, and I think that something like that will have to happen eventually in regards to these things. Um, I believe the government knows they exist. Um, I believe the government knows there are other things out there as well that exist that it just gives me goosebumps to even think about. Um, but I think that there will come a point. I mean, if indeed our government and other governments finally concede to the reality that there are extraterrestrial or extra dimensional beings visiting Earth, then Bigfoot's next. Bigfoot's next on the list.
Do you think Bigfoot might possibly be an extra, or an interdimensional type of creature?
I'm from the things I've read, the things I've heard, I believe it's possible. Again, I don't discard or I don't sign off on any of that stuff. I have some good friends who've gotten some video evidence that just blows my mind. Um, Photographs and short videos of things happening in the woods that just boggle my mind. I don't even begin to understand. One friend of mine, Scott Carpenter, has a video on YouTube that shows what looks to be an actual portal forming behind him on a trail in the Smoky Mountains. It's interesting to say the least. I can't say for sure, I wasn't there, but I believe Scott Carpenter is a reputable person, and I don't believe he would lie or make things up. Um,
I've seen that. It is interesting. I interviewed him on one of my shows, one of my earlier shows, and have
mhm.
that on in the show. It is a
Yeah,
very interesting thing to look at. Yeah.
right. It's it's very strange, and of course, I've heard reports, where they come up out of the ground. They just pop up out of the ground and run away. You never would have known they were there unless you were there to see it come out of the ground. Which was a very strange encounter that this lady had in West Tennessee back in the '60s. She actually shared with me. So
Well, I haven't heard
yeah,
that one.
well,
Were they
yeah,
like down in the ground, or was it just like
yeah.
lying on the ground and popped up?
It was in the ground. Now, of course, she didn't specify if it was laying down. I assumed it was laying down. But back in the '60s, she was a teenager in the '60s, and her dad took her deer hunting in West Tennessee. And of course, land's flat down there, a lot of farmland down there. And she was put in a tree stand in front of a cornfield, and the corn had been cut down, and all that was left was stalks, and there was just a little bit of snow on the ground. And her dad walked off and went on down to another area to another tree stand, And she got there before daylight, and she was sitting in the stand. And just as the sun was coming up, she could see dust and snow and all this stuff just start rippling up, and about, I think she said, maybe 40 or 50 yards out into the field. And as she sat there and she said she watched it, she said it just stood up and walked in the opposite direction away from her. And she said it was huge, but she never would have known it was there. Now maybe it may have dug a hole that night and slept there, or there may have been some kind of an opening in the ground where it crawled out of. I'm not sure. And it seemed to not have known she was there when she watched it walk away, and she never saw it again. And of course, that was a pretty good distance away. She didn't have too many details. It was just very large and covered with hair, walking on two legs.
Have you ever heard of the kind of the unusual lights and orbs and things like that around Big? Have you
Yeah,
experienced any of that, or research cases like that?
I know of a gentleman whose son took a video very close to my home where there was an orb up in a tree. I've never experienced orbs. I've never seen them, but I have some very good friends who have experienced them. Experienced different colors: yellow, blue, even a reddish type orb, and an orangish color. Most of them describe them anywhere from the size of softballs to soccer balls. Um, and again, there's a lot of people who contribute that to Bigfoot activity, because if you see an orb, a lot of times you'll see a Bigfoot as well, and that goes along with UFO. A lady at the conference just last week showed me some ring video. Uh, her ring camera was pointed out to the front of her home, and she's always getting Bigfoot activity. She's seen Bigfoot before, and there were two specific incidents. There was a clearing, probably from the looks of the phone, from the video, it was probably 250 yards from the front of her house, out in a clearing. And it was dark, so I can't be for sure. But there was something sitting out there with lights. And then the next thing you know, she's having Bigfoot activity. She's had that happen 3 or 4 different times. It's like whatever those lights are, they come down and they stay a while. And a little while later, she has activity. And she's actually tried to take pictures of these Bigfoot. And every time she does that, her camera glitches on her phone, which is not uncommon. I've heard a lot of that, where she actually showed me a photograph that she took of a male Sasquatch, probably 20 yards from her front door, looking at the front door of her house. And when she took the picture, it just glitched out. Um, it just turned gray, and you saw all this pixelated stuff. And I can't explain that either. And then she said, that's the only time my phone's ever done that. That's the only time she ever had a good opportunity to take a picture too. So that's one of those paranormal things. That gets really, really creepy, because you just can't explain that. And I have friends, an actual girl in our group. She was in Cades Cove and doing a video where her and her mom found a 16-inch track in Cades Cove in Sevier County near the Smokies. And I think it's Sevier County, but it's in the national park. And she's panning around with her video on her phone, and she would come to a specific place every time, and it would glitch out. The screen would just start making all kinds of racket, mess, and just almost like an old TV with white noise and the fuzz that would come up. And then as she would move on by it would come back up, and she could video. It's very strange, just one spot. And it's like, I'm guessing there's probably something standing there that didn't want to be photographed or didn't want to be videoed. So it's really weird.
That is very strange. I don't think I've heard of that before. I've heard of batteries being drained. Have you heard of
Mm-hmm.
those stories?
I have. I've never experienced that myself, but I've heard those stories as well. Flashlights dying, cell phones dying. Even some of these folks who have this more intricate equipment that they use to try to find these things, they tend to have trouble keeping them charged. They always take a lot of fresh batteries with them, and then sometimes they'll try to change the batteries out, and the batteries they brought with them are dead as well. So yeah, it's odd. There's something to be said about that. I mean, we can't ignore that. We don't know what it is. and we can speculate all day long, but we can't ignore it.
Do you, when you go out and research in some of the areas that you've been out in nature with, do you find any of the structures, the
I have found a few structures in my investigations, and again, it's like the twists in the limbs that are broken. I have seen those, and I have had people send me all kinds of pictures of stuff like that. Um, it was I can't I can't figure out how it could have been done naturally. Um, I've actually found piles of sticks that were shaped in a way that looked kind of like somebody was building a campfire, but then they didn't. And I don't mean like a teepee kind of a thing. I mean just they were sticks just laying on top of one another, just in a circular kind of a motion. It looked kind of like a grid of 360 degrees, or a pie. You think of a pie cut into 8 slices, laying on the ground. It was just all these sticks laying on top of one another in a round circle that looked like a piece of a pie that had been cut. They were, and they had been there a very long time, and I don't see how that could have happened naturally. Um, of course, it's possible. I can't say for 100%, but and then I have found actual structures that look like the trees had been woven, the limbs had been woven in and out of one another uh, to hold it in place. Others, a lot of times you see these bows in the woods. People say, "Oh, I saw something that was Bigfoot related. There was a bow in the woods." And a lot of times you'll see a sapling that's bent over in a bow, but another tree's laying on it. Um, that can be natural. I can't say 100% that that's Bigfoot related. And even too, things that get built. I mean, like let's say you've got up some Boy Scouts or some hikers out in the woods, and they do something like that. That stuff can stay for years, and nobody will ever know it's there except the people who built it. So, I'm very skeptical on structures, but I have seen some strange things.
well, in your years of research, I'm sure you've had a lot of people tell you different stories. Is there anyone that stood out to you?
There's so many, and I've probably forgotten some. When I first started doing this, I started trying to do this like a BFRO type thing. I would write everything down, and weather and date and time, and just the demeanor of the person, and all that kind of stuff. And it got so monotonous after a while because that stuff's already been recorded. So I don't keep those kinds of records anymore. I stopped doing that. It took too much of my time. And but now there are a few that stick out. I mean, there was this one lady. She came to a festival, a local festival, and swore to me. And of course, her daughter was there too. And her daughter said, "Now, don't believe anything she says. Don't believe any," because I don't believe her daughter believed her. But she lived up next to the side of a ridge, and she had a refrigerator on her back porch, and that's where she kept her Pepsis. And she swore to me. She swore to me up and down that that thing would come out of the hills every couple of days and take her Pepsis. And I had no reason to doubt her. But of course, her daughter kindly laughed at her and made fun of her. And she was so angry with her daughter about it because they wouldn't believe her. She said, "Oh, it's just some kids down the road coming up there and stealing your Pepsis." She said, "No, I see this thing come out of the woods, come up on my back porch and take my Pepsis." So she was adamant. She was completely adamant about that. So I believe her. Whether or not, you know, I wasn't there, so I don't know for sure. But I believe she saw what she saw. I believe she believes what she saw. And then, of course, I have some members who've had encounters. One particular member, Eric, he was out in Morgan County. He was working for a satellite dish company, and it was broad daylight. And this thing just walked up out of the ditch and crossed the road in front of him about 15 feet away, and just turned and looked at him while it was walking, and then walked right down and was gone. He said it was the biggest thing and the most scary looking thing he'd ever seen, and it changed his life. Um, he's he's into it with us, and he goes and he has to go look for it nowadays. Uh, he has to have answers. Most of the people who I've talked to, uh, it's a one-off thing, and they let it go and they think about it on occasion. But some folks, it really gets with them.
I think a lot of that has to do when you've had a sighting and you want validity, you want to know more about what it was that you saw because it's made such an impact.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, even with me, not being a witness, I have to know. I have to. I can't let it go. I can't just sit down and let it go. That's I've been doing it all this time now, and I don't get a lot of reports. I get maybe honestly, most of the reports I get are probably 5 to 10 years plus old. I very rarely get fresh reports, um, and I don't get very many, maybe 3 or 4 a year. I can't make it up as I go, and I'm not one of those types of people who go out and just look in the woods. I have to have a reason to go to where I'm going, and that's when I do find evidence. But yeah, it's just I think it's just part of how we are as people. We just want to know. We just want answers. Some of us want the answers. Some of us wish we'd never even begun looking into it. I saw a friend there at the conference last week, and he said, "Well, are you still among the non-witnesses or the non-encounterers?" And he said, "Yeah." I said, "Yeah." I said, "I've still not seen one." He said, "Me either, but I'm still looking." so, and I said, "Well, yeah, maybe, but are you sure you want to know? Are you sure you want to see it?" And he said, "I can't make up my mind. Sometimes I do, and sometimes I don't, because even then, knowing they exist, knowing they are real, the actual, I guess, the kicker would be actually seeing it, and that would be, I don't know what that would do for me. I don't know if I would be prepared for that or not, because it messes with people. It really changes things for them.
And in what way do you think that changes a person's perspective?
Well, I guess the simplest thing is that when science and education tells you that these things don't exist, and all of a sudden they do, well, now you can't trust anybody. Now you can't believe anything anybody tells you. Certainly, and I'm a spiritual person by all means. I believe in Jesus Christ as my Savior, but the church doesn't acknowledge this kind of thing. And we're not taught that these things exist. And when something like that happens, your whole paradigm shifts. Everything changes. The world is not as it seems. There's a lot of things out there that we just don't even understand. And most people can't grasp that. And it's hard enough for someone like me to grasp it. But a lot of people, they just don't want to hear it. They don't want no part of it. That's why it's made fun of. You watch the news and you hear of a Bigfoot sighting and it comes up on the news and they have it tongue in cheek and they laugh it off. And I think that there may come a day when nobody's going to be laughing anymore, and it's going to really creep some people out. And maybe that's why they're trying to keep it under wraps. I think there is actually as with many things in society today, I believe there is a manipulative disinformation campaign on Bigfoot. I think
What do
that
you,
there are people out there. Go ahead.
yeah, what do you think about the other cryptids like Dogman and Mothman and things like that?
Dogman scares me to death. I remember when I was young and saw American Werewolf in London, and that just creeps me out. But to think that of werewolves and things like that, those are the things that nightmares are made of. And a dog man sounds to me like a werewolf in all its forms. So I believe in the possibility of that. I know people who have seen these things, and I believe them. I've had maybe 2 or 3 people over the course of the past many years that have described dog men to me. And of course, I can't help them. I'm sorry. I can point you in some direction of some people who might be able to give you some answers, but I can't help you. Um, Mothman, I believe certainly in the possibility of that. But again, that to me would be a more of a paranormal thing, a spiritual thing. If you're a spiritual person, you have to look at things from a spiritual lens, and I do that. Those who don't have any sort of spiritual guideline for their life. Those are the ones who kindly dismiss the things that people see and people experience that are odd. They just write it off and say, well, they were hallucinating, and maybe they were on drugs, or maybe they were drinking or something like that, and they just saw all this craziness. But I believe in the possibility of all those things and even more. I even had someone tell me one time, and this is probably something that of course, that was their opinion, and that's what a lot of this is opinion. Most of it is opinion. He told me that Bigfoot are here to protect us from everything else that's out there, and that's kind of odd, because there are things out there that we can't even begin to understand, that are maybe out to get us, maybe out to serve us for dinner or something like that. I don't know, but I think what he called it was, they call themselves, and of course there's a biblical connotation to this, that Bigfoot are our brothers, and they are their brother's keeper. Uh, Whether or not, that was his take, and there are a lot of different takes, a lot of different opinions on it.
What do you think about the Native American viewpoint that these things are um, uh, somewhat humanoid?
I accept their I accept their beliefs. I absolutely do. I believe, the native people of this nation and even other nations, they were been here longer than we have. They've experienced this longer than we have. And I will accept anything that they tell me over any scientific method. And I believe that they know what they're talking about. Nothing but respect for those folks. Absolutely. They know what they're talking about. If whether or not they're a spiritual manifestation of nature, keepers of the woods, and even some of them, they talk about them. Some of them are cannibalistic in nature. They called them people. They called them a tribe. Different tribes, and they traded with them, and they dealt with them, and then the white man showed up and just screwed everything up. So there may have been some harmony between the native people and these things at one time, but no more. And I think that's our fault. The white skin.
What do you think about people who talk about having a fairly positive relationship, or at least a respectful relationship with these things habitually on their property?
I have no reason to doubt them, but again, that comes into a place. I talked to a lady years ago, and this is where I kindly have to wonder sometimes, because I just asked her a simple question: what do they call themselves? And she said she couldn't tell me because they would know, and it would hurt their feelings, or they would be angry with me. Um, I can't take pictures of them because they would know and they would be angry with me. I get that, but at the same time, if I believe that someone who's actually having that kind of a relationship with these people, or this clan, or these beings, whatever they are, I think I think they should keep that to themselves, because if they're not willing to share what they know and understand, then they're just causing more trouble than they are good. I mean, not in a negative sense, but I mean, they bring more questions than they do answers, and it causes a lot of people to just say, well, surely they're just cuckoo. They're crazy. They're just making this stuff up. And if they're not willing to prove anything, then they don't need to be talking about it. I mean, honestly, that's how I feel. I mean, if you have a Bigfoot living on your property, introduce us. Now, so many of us want to know more, but they're not willing to share that information, and all we can do is listen to what they have to say. And if they're telling the truth or not, we don't know. We just don't know. So we're skeptical. We have to be. I mean, I'm more skeptical now than I was in 2005. Everything I saw in the woods was a Bigfoot related thing, a tree limb, a rock, or anything. Well, it looks like a Bigfoot's been here. But as I've grown into this, and the longer I do it, the more skeptical I become. I get people send me pictures every week of, what do you think of this? What do you think of that? And very few of them stand out to be interesting. Most of them are, nah, ain't no way. That's a fake. I can usually spot a fake. So, yeah, I've been listening to a few people online who talk about having habituated or being part of a clan, so to speak. I met a gentleman up there at the conference last week. If he handed me a card and I checked him out, and he's talking about how that he knows all these things, and that's great and wonderful, but he's he's not proving it. And I think that's probably the most important, is trying to prove it. I don't have anything to prove to anybody, but I'm trying to find out for myself. I couldn't prove it. I couldn't prove these things existed to you or anybody else today for any amount of money. There's nothing I could do to prove that they exist, but I know they do. And I'm just on the journey trying to find out more about it.
What do you think will be the evidence that comes forward? Do you think it will find DNA?
DNA is probably a good beginning point. I would think that the DNA, Matt Moneymaker talked about that there's some sort of big DNA experiment going on, that they're starting with some university. Of course, the same group of people didn't want anything to do with Melba Ketchum's study, and I believe she's already proven the truth. But they say that there were some things that she done wrong, and I've not studied into that very much, and I'm not a scientific person, so I can't say to that. But I believe she did prove that there was some human aspects to these things. I think that's very possible. Um, I don't think there's anything we can see on a screen today that will definitively prove, because there's AI and CGI. There's so much of that junk going on right now. Suddenly we find these pictures that were found in a mason jar from the 1800s. I know you've seen them. They're all over the place now. Somebody standing beside a Bigfoot, who they were working in a mine together. That's garbage. And we're overrun with it. And AI is only going to get better. And CGI is only going to get better. Unfortunately, I think the ultimate thing, somebody like me, but definitely not me, because I'm anti-kill and I'm no kill. But I think that the only way it's going to really be proven if a body shows up, because I don't think they can be caught. I do believe they can be killed, but I don't believe they can be caught. And unfortunately, I think that's the only way that's going to prove it to the masses that they're real. If someone shows up with a definitive body, and even then, I think there's such a cover up with the powers that be that they would probably put their own lives in danger exposing such a thing. I don't think the government wants people to know. I think the government does know. They have bodies. They have captured. They have killed, and all that stuff. From everything I understand about it, it's just a big rabbit hole. But I think the only thing that's really going to prove it's a body or a living specimen. Nothing else. Nothing else will work.
What do you think of the Patterson Gimlin film?
Mm. I'll say first that even if it is proven fake, it doesn't change my belief. But there are a lot of people who say that it's not real. Then, of course, there are a lot of other people who say it is. Um, Bob Hieronymus claims that he wore the suit, and he was actually on a TV show back in the 80s or 90s called Lie Detector, and he passed the lie detector test. So my jury's out. It looks good, but my jury's out. I don't know about it for sure, but it doesn't matter to me one way or the other. I like looking at it. I like watching it. Um, it looks real to me, but whether or not it is, I don't know. And again, like I say, it wouldn't matter. I still know they exist.
Well, because half your family's seen them.
Yeah, yeah. My mom would never lie to me. She would not have lied to me in her lifetime. No.
Exactly. When you have that kind of firsthand experience, it makes a lot of difference than just taking
Yeah.
secondhand knowledge of it. Yeah.
Right. Right. Yeah. My son, he don't like to talk about it, and he's 33 now, and uh, he don't talk about it very much at all. I don't ask. I know he's very sensitive on the topic. Of course, my mom, she's passed away now, and my ex sister in law's passed away. My sister don't like to talk about it. Her kids won't talk about it. Her husband has passed away, so yeah, it's people don't like to talk about this around here very much. Um, People make fun of people. I get so much, people make so much fun of me. Uh, and I'm okay with it. I'm used to it at this point. It's just water off a duck's back as far as I'm concerned. I don't care what people think of me. I know they're real, And, I do hope someday for some vindication. I hope I'm alive when it happens and I can turn around to all those folks and say, I told you so. But, even if not, it doesn't change the fact.
So what do you look for when you're taking a report or hear a story or talk to people about this? Um, and you're using a lot of discernment with their story, as to whether it holds a truthful point, or you feel like they're just embellishing or lying, or at least in their perspective, it's not quite correct. So what is it that helps you have that on your radar, whether or not it's true?
Probably the tears in their eyes and the quake in their voice and the absolute just enamored. They're just so enamored with what they've seen and what they've heard, and it's just you can see it. Some people, I mean, yeah, there's been a few people that just, and that's why I like to talk to people in person. They're they're physically shaking. Um, the hair on the back of their neck is standing up, and they begin to cry, and I don't know what I've seen, and it was terrible, and it was horrible, and the excitement in their voice when they tell the story. I've heard of all kinds of situations, road crossings, and these kinds of things. It's more of how they tell the story than what they're saying. And of course, the things they tell me, I listen for those things, those correlations, locations, for example, where these things are being seen. A lot of the places where they're being seen is common type places. Whereas, for example, near dumpsters, in cul-de-sacs where there's a lot of rubbish in the back of a cul-de-sac, where maybe somebody came and dropped off an old dishwasher or a stack of pallets or an old truck tire, you know, where there's a lot of garbage laying around, old garbage, not just, not trash, but old refuse, old cars, old buildings. They tend to hang out there. And I think they hang out there because they're looking for food. A lot of rodents hang out in places like that. Um, but again, more than anything, it's the demeanor of the person and how they're telling me what they're telling me and how excited they are and how emotional they become. That's a telltale for me, anyway. Again, I may have heard some things that completely fooled me. There may have been some lies told that I didn't grasp, and I may have I may have even told you a story that was a lie today, but I believe what they told me was true.
So what else can you tell me? What else has stood out in this field of Bigfoot research and all the people you've met? What else can you tell me?
It's ever changing. My opinions change daily on who and what these things are. Uh, and a lot of people I talk to, I mean, again, some of the people I've seen at these conferences, I've seen more than once. And every year they'll come back and say, I've had a change of heart about this aspect of it because I've learned something new. And I think that's a good thing because um, there are a lot of people that study the subject that are so dogmatic in their beliefs that they are not willing to budge either direction, either, it's just an unknown primate. And that's even that connotation, that is such a that's just a wide swath of, you know, if it's a human being, it's still an unknown primate because scientifically we are primates. So that just covers a whole gambit. Maybe that's how they try to explain it away. But for many years, we've been told, and we've been kindly corralled into believing that there's nothing supernatural about these things, that there's nothing paranormal about these things, and that's changing because there's too many of us out there that have heard stories and have been told things, and there are people out there that have witnessed things that can't be explained. Um, a lot of people don't want to go there for the sake of popularity. Even if there's somebody, some people are trying to get on TV or even talk to people like you, who won't talk about those aspects because they're afraid of being lumped into that woo woo group. I don't care about that either. I'm telling you, just I'm sharing with you the things that I understand the best way I can tell you. There's something more to these things than just a physical flesh and blood being. And I think a lot of people's minds are changing about that. And maybe it has something to do with, some of the new revelations about UAPs. Well, if there are UFOs, maybe there's Bigfoot. If there's Bigfoot, maybe there's Mothman. If there's Mothman, maybe there's Dogmen. Um, People are opening up to that kind of thing now. Without, we're not being as ridiculed as we used to be. For example, I kept my mouth shut about it a lot, but in 2005, it was just an unknown primate, and that's how I approached it, and it just evolved from there, and it's changed so much over the years.
Do you think people talking about it more and a lots more in the way of things on TV and movies and such that it has kind of opened the door for this to be an easier subject for people to talk about?
I think so, for the most part. Yeah, I think that. Well, in any case, maybe not in the daily lives of people. A lot of people still don't want to talk about it, but uh, there are conferences and festivals all over the place year round now. I mean, you can pick any month and find 4 or 5 different festivals within 100 miles of your home, probably. Uh, and if you want to talk about it with somebody, you certainly can. And of course, I had the opportunity once to do a presentation at a Knox County library. Even they are interested in trying to find out more about this kind of stuff. So um, people came, people wanted to hear, and people had things to say, and people had encounters that they wanted to talk about. But yeah, I think TV and podcasts, especially podcasts like Tony Merkel's Confessionals and Wes Germer's Sasquatch Chronicles, and some of these others out here, they're on fire with it. I mean, they're really popular, and people want to hear, people want to know. I think it's just a shift in consciousness. It's the best way I can say it. More common people are trying to embrace, or at the very least, understand the possibility that our reality is not exactly what everyone's told us it's been.
Well, I think that is very true. In all the interviews I've done, the one thing that does stand consistent is that it seems that the reality that you think you know before you get involved with Bigfoot is not the reality that you realize exists after you start
Right.
exploring this subject.
Yeah, yeah. It's troubling. It is. It's troubling. It's stressful. It's not an easy path. It's you start rethinking who you are and your place in the world, and it's interesting to say the least. Most people aren't willing to take that path. Most people don't want their beliefs challenged. Most people don't want their ideas about who they are messed with. I told you earlier that I am a Christian, and I've had to rethink some things about my Christianity, about things I've been taught and the way I was raised. And I still have the biblical worldview, but that worldview now includes things that I've had to learn from people that were more on the fringes. You say Dr. Michael Heiser, for example. He's passed away, but he has a very unique perspective about the past, about biblical history. I used to be a young Earth creationist. I no longer am. I believe this Earth could very well be millions of years old. Um, I'm not sure how old it is, but I don't believe it's 6,000 years. But that's a whole other conversation.